A young soldier named Feldwebel Vera Hartmann stares through train glass on May 15th, 1943. 20 years old, exhausted from 3 endless days since departing Camp Shanks in New York. 3 full days absorbed in watching his enemy's homeland sweep past the windows. 3 days attempting to make sense of everything unfolding before his eyes. The locomotive eases into another weathered station platform in Amarillo, Texas. Standing there, a figure wearing worn leather chaps and that signature broad hat observes the passing cars. An authentic cowboy exists before them, flesh and blood. Not some poster created for rallying citizens, not an invention of cinema, but a genuine American working the range, fingers rolling tobacco, eyes narrowed against the relentless desert glare. Hartmann travels with 499 fellow German prisoners, all about to step into a reality that Josef Goebbels swore could never be real. These men had served the Africa Corps, captured mainly during operations at Kasserine Pass, battles in Tunis, fighting across Sicily. Soldiers who'd marched under Rommel's command. Warriors who'd resigned themselves to dying beneath foreign sands. New desert, radically different ending. The Nazi propaganda apparatus had painted a precise picture of what American imprisonment would bring. Savagery and pain. The supposedly uncivilized mixed population of this new world nation would strip them of dignity. After all, hadn't they been told Americans were weak? Corrupted by comfort, just cowboys and criminals, a society of blended races devoid of refinement or respect. The initial surprise arrived aboard transport vessels. Genuine white bread, actual coffee, 3 prepared meals each day. Portions larger than German troops had witnessed in countless months. Identical rations provided to American forces as mandated by Geneva Convention rules. Now, while the railcars push them further into Texas territory, contradictions keep mounting. Beyond the glass, they observe farmland without boundaries, cattle herds extending toward every horizon, oil derricks extracting black liquid wealth, settlements with electrical lighting, roads covered in asphalt, automobiles occupying every street. One captive would eventually write home to family. The Americans possess such abundance, they even extend generosity toward those fighting against them. Camp Hearne sits in Texas, 30 miles northwest from Houston, constructed to hold 4,800 prisoners. In truth, an entire small American community transplanted into cotton-growing territory. Buses traveling from the rail depot pass through the primary entrance. The Germans anticipate machine gun platforms, vicious guard dogs, merciless overseers. What greets them instead are housing units equipped with electrical power and interior water systems, heated showers, working toilets, amenities numerous soldiers never experienced back in Germany. The camp's commanding officer speaks to them via translation. The expectations are straightforward. Labor 8 hours daily. Respect established protocols. Create no disruptions. What they receive in exchange includes 3 solid meals throughout each day. Payment of 80 cents per day using camp currency. Access to the canteen. Time for activities. Correspondence from their homeland. Antretia Friedrich Becker struggles to comprehend what reaches his ears. Wages. The Americans intend to compensate prisoners using the same rate as American. Privates receiving $50 monthly. Morning arrives, and they're introduced to their labor coordinators. Not military personnel, but ranchers, those growing cotton, men working cattle, individuals in faded denim and weathered leather boots, men requiring assistance for harvest season. The American food production system supplies half the liberated world, yet American youth fight through Italy, preparing for France. Texas cotton acreage stretches across thousands of plots. Without labor, crops will decay in the fields. The Germans represent the solution every farmer desperately needs. A rancher called John Davidson examines the assembled prisoner group. He requires 40 men for cotton field operations. He indicates the largest, most powerful Germans. Then he executes something that freezes everyone completely. He approaches, offers his hand forward, and provides his name. In Texas, he clarifies through translation. Men exchange handshakes before laboring alongside each other. Oberth writer Wilhelm Miller stares at that extended palm. 6 months prior, he'd been engaging Americans in Tunisian combat. Now one seeks to grip his hand like a peer. He accepts it. Davidson's grasp feels solid, hardened, belonging to someone who works with his hands. The cotton territory of Brazos County extends for miles beneath Texas sunshine. The labor proves punishing. Backs bent constantly, fingers torn and bleeding, sacks weighing 100 pounds. Yet something remarkable occurs within those fields. The German captives labor beside Mexican migrant laborers, black sharecroppers, impoverished white tenant farmers. The racial structure the Nazis preached disintegrates under that Texas heat. Everyone perspires identically. Everyone's spine aches the same. Everyone drinks water from shared buckets. When noon arrives, Rosa Martinez, the ranch's cook, signals the meal bell. The prisoners anticipate bread and water portions. Instead, they receive beef stew, cornbread, sweet tea, apple pie. Rosa speaks no German. The prisoners lack Spanish, yet she serves generous helpings onto their plates while smiling. Food transcends language barriers. Vera Hartmann would retain this meal in memory throughout his remaining years, not due to the cuisine, but because a Mexican woman extends the same kindness toward German prisoners she shows every other person. The Third Reich declared this scenario impossible. The Third Reich was mistaken. Saturday evening, Camp Hearne. The recreation building fills with musical sounds, not military compositions, not Nazi-approved anthems, but Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys broadcast over radio. Western Swing, the soundtrack of America in 1943. Following Italy's side change in September 1943, Italian prisoners gained expanded freedoms. They could participate in local dances with chaperones and oversight. German prisoners observed with longing. Some facilities eventually permitted carefully monitored social gatherings. Always supervised, always managed, but still offering a fragment of normalcy during wartime. The prisoners establish bands, absorb American songs. Some compose original pieces. A peculiar blend of German folk tunes and Western swing music existing nowhere else globally. The correspondence sent home generates its own predicament. What words can they write? How do they describe this to families enduring Allied bombing raids, to mothers queuing at ration distribution points, to wives who haven't consumed meat in months? Friedrich Becker writes to his wife in Hamburg, "The Americans differ from what we were told. They have provided warm clothing and quality boots. We consume meat daily. I'm accumulating my wages. Upon my return home, we will possess money." He omits mentioning the prosperity surrounding him, the vehicles every farmer possesses, the electric illumination burning through nights, the shops stocked with merchandise. How could he? She wouldn't accept it as truth. The censors wouldn't permit it through regardless. Camp Milan near Amarillo. Here the Cowboys aren't symbolic. They're authentic, and they require assistance with thousands of cattle heads. The rancher, Thomas Anderson, surveys his new laborers, Luftwaffe pilots, panzer operators, U-boat sailors. Not a single one has encountered a cow at close range. He releases a breath. This will prove interesting. He begins with fundamentals: how to approach horses, how to grip rope properly, how to avoid kicks, bites, or trampling. The Germans feel terrified of these animals. The animals remain suspicious of the Germans. It's reciprocal distrust at initial contact. But Anderson possesses patience. His own son flies B-7s over Germany. These young men before him belong to someone's sons, too. Enemy status or not, they're present. Within weeks, something extraordinary unfolds. The Germans adapt to ranching as though born for it. Perhaps it's their military precision. Perhaps it's their engineering intellects appreciating the coordination of moving cattle. Perhaps it's simply that laboring with animals offers honesty in ways warfare never could. Hibman Eric Schmidt becomes Anderson's most skilled horseman. He can rope, brand, and treat cattle alongside the finest ranch hands. During evenings, he sketches the terrain. Mesa during sunset, longhorns silhouetted against sky, cowboys and Germans laboring side by side. Images that would prove impossible anywhere else worldwide. In 1943, when the war still burned fiercely across oceans and continents, Sunday mornings inside the boundaries of American prisoner-of-war camps carried an unexpected, quiet reverence. Within the barbed wire, where German soldiers waited out their uncertain fates, hymns drifted through the air. Lutheran ministers and Catholic priests, once officers, medics, or engineers, now served as shepherds to fellow captives. They held worship services in mess halls converted into makeshift chapels, wooden benches standing in for pews. The U.S. military supplied them with hymnals, rosaries, candles, and Bibles. Freedom of religion, even for the enemy, even for men who, only months before, had fought to destroy them. The guards, often local farm boys in uniform, watched quietly from a distance. They didn't interfere. Some even hummed along to the familiar melodies that crossed the barbed wire, songs that sounded nearly identical to those sung in their own churches back home. The Americans allowed Christmas services, baptisms, even confessions. In a few areas, local pastors invited small groups of prisoners to attend nearby churches on holidays, escorted, but unchained, Christmas Eve, 1944. In a modest American church decorated with pine branches and candles, a handful of German prisoners sat quietly in the last pews. Snow had dusted the countryside outside. The congregation began to sing Silent Night, but when the melody reached the Germans, they softly joined in, Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht. The song's original language filled the church with haunting familiarity. By the third verse, several of the prisoners wept, not from homesickness, but from the shock of being treated as human beings by the very people they had been told were monsters. 2 days earlier, in the dry expanse of Arizona, a different story unfolded. December 23rd, 1944, Camp Papago Park near Phoenix. For 3 months, 25 captured U-boat sailors had been quietly excavating a tunnel beneath their barracks. Their plan was daring, absurdly so. They intended to crawl through 178 feet of soil and emerge beyond the camp's perimeter fence. Then, using a collapsible boat built from scrap and tar, they would float down the Salt River, reach the Gila, then the Colorado, and finally Mexico. Freedom was so close they could taste it. That night, beneath a cold and brilliant desert moon, Captain Littman Hanser Kraus led his men through the tunnel. Their hands were raw, their uniforms torn, but their spirits soared. They emerged into the open desert, free men once again. They ran toward the river's edge, only to stop dead. The Salt River was dry, not a trickle, not a puddle. Nothing but dust, cracked mud, and scattered stones. Their maps, carefully studied for months, were from 1880, before the dams, before irrigation. Their precious boat lay useless on the sand. Freedom vanished as suddenly as it appeared. They split up, hoping to find water, food, anything. But the Arizona desert is merciless. At night, temperatures plunged toward freezing. By day, the sun seared the ground until it shimmered. After 2 days, their rations were gone. One sailor, Unteroffizier Johann Kramer, stumbled into a gas station outside Phoenix 3 days later. His lips were split, his skin burned red by the sun. He collapsed inside the doorway, barely conscious. The station attendant, an elderly man named Pete, didn't see an enemy, just a suffering young man. He gave Kramer water, made him a sandwich, and called the authorities. While they waited, he poured him coffee and spoke of his own son fighting somewhere in the Pacific. 2 father's sons, one lost in the desert, one lost in the war, sharing silence over steaming cups of coffee. Another escapee, Captain Jürgen Büttner, managed to reach downtown Phoenix. He wandered among neon-lit diners and gas stations, amazed by the calm normalcy of American life. He sat quietly on Van Buren Street until a street cleaner, noticing his accent, called the police. When they found him, Büttner didn't resist. He simply said he was ready to go back. Even free, he remarked. America still feels like America, comfortable, civilized, impossible to hate. By the spring of 1945, as Europe collapsed and Allied troops closed in on Berlin, the mood inside the American camps changed. Letters from home stopped coming. German cities were nothing but smoking ruins. Families had vanished. For many prisoners, there was nothing left to return to. On the Texas plains, ranchers who had grown accustomed to the German laborers faced a new kind of sorrow. Thomas Anderson, who had taught several of his German cowboys how to rope and ride, offered to keep them on after the war. He promised fair wages, $100 a month plus room and board, more than most could hope to earn in a shattered Germany. But the Geneva Convention was clear. Once the war ended, all prisoners had to be repatriated. There were no exceptions. Still, letters poured into Congress from farmers across Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. "These men aren't enemies anymore," they wrote. "They're friends. They're the best workers we've ever had." But regulations were regulations. May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. In Camp Hearne, Texas, the prisoners gathered around radios to hear the news. Germany had surrendered. The Reich that was meant to last 1,000 years had ended in 12. Some wept quietly. Others stared at the ground. A few simply sighed in relief. That evening, rancher John Davidson arrived at the camp gate with a bottle of pre-war bourbon. He poured glasses for Wilhelm Müller and the other Germans who had worked his cotton fields. They drank not as enemies, but as men who had shed sweat, dust, and harvests. They toasted the dead on both sides, and to whatever came next. Müller told Davidson, through an interpreter he no longer really needed, that he hoped to return someday, not as a prisoner but as a free man. America, he said, had shown him something Germany never had, that strength didn't require cruelty, that power could exist alongside decency, that enemies could become friends under the same sun. In 1946, the repatriation began. Trains rolled east, carrying tens of thousands of German prisoners toward Atlantic ports. From there, ships crossed the ocean back to a broken homeland. Yet the men returned with something their commanders hadn't planned on them bringing: knowledge, not of secret weapons or strategies, but of American life. They had seen how Americans farmed, managed, and built. They understood now that America's prosperity wasn't magic. It was method, discipline, and machinery. And above all, they carried new understanding of Americans themselves. They spoke of Thomas Anderson, teaching them to ride horses, Rosa Martinez ladling extra stew into their bowls, John Davidson shaking their hands. They told of Pete, the gas station man who saved an escaped prisoner's life. Their stories were so humane that few back in Germany believed them. Impossible, the people said. The Americans would never treat us that well. Yet the truth was undeniable. Between 1943 and 1946, over 425,000 German prisoners worked American farms across 46 states. They harvested millions of dollars in crops, picked cotton by the ton, and saved countless harvests that would have rotted without their labor. The agricultural miracle that helped feed the Allied war effort was, in part, their doing. By 1950, immigration laws shifted. Former prisoners were allowed to return, not as captives, but as immigrants. Around 5,000 did. They sailed from Hamburg and Bremen, bound not for confinement, but for opportunity. One former Africa Corps sergeant arrived in Texas in 1951. John Davidson was there to meet him. Same platform, same handshake, only stronger this time. The man's English was perfect, tinged with a Texas drawl. He married a local woman, opened a machine shop repairing tractors, and sent his son to Texas A&M to study agriculture. Decades later, His grandson would serve in Afghanistan with the 82nd Airborne, wearing the uniform of the nation that once held his grandfather captive. Another returned to Arizona to work once again for Thomas Anderson, eventually purchasing his own ranch near Tucson. He raised quarter horses, won prizes at state fairs, and became known as one of the best horsemen in the county. No one cared that he had once worn the uniform of an enemy army. In Arizona, what mattered was how you worked, not where you were born. Even one of the Papago Park escapees came back, legally this time, opening a small hardware store in Phoenix, just a few miles from where he'd been captured. The irony was rich, but so was the redemption. Years later, elderly former prisoners and their American hosts would reunite. They'd gather in community halls with photo albums full of young faces, some in Wehrmacht uniforms, others in denim and cowboy hats, smiling together in cotton fields. At one such reunion, an old rancher rose to speak. His voice trembled with age, but not with uncertainty. "You boys came here as enemies," he said. "You left as friends. And you came back as family." Applause filled the hall. Former foes embraced. Not a dry eye in the room. The statistics tell one story: 25,000 German prisoners, 700 camps across 46 states, millions of dollars in crops harvested, 5,000 returning as immigrants. But the true story lies beyond numbers. It's in the transformations of hearts, of perspectives, of what it means to be human. Men who once marched under the banners of tyranny found themselves in the American West, riding horses, fixing fences, harvesting cotton, discovering that mercy was more powerful than hatred. They arrived as soldiers of the Third Reich. They left as cowboys of a freer world, in the red dust of Texas fields, beneath the mesas of New Mexico, under the endless Arizona sky. They learned the most subversive lesson imaginable for any totalitarian creed: that humanity is stronger than propaganda, that hatred cannot survive shared labor, that an enemy is only a stranger you haven't worked beside yet. As one prisoner wrote to his mother before being repatriated, "They told us Americans were cowboys. They were right, but they never told us cowboys could be kind. And in that kindness, thousands of former enemies found something worth believing in, something far more enduring than any empire."